A young woman handed into an arranged marriage without explanation. A powerful millionaire, marked by traumas he never revealed. With each touch, she got closer to the truth he wanted to hide. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening from. The cold June wind swept through the dead leaves in the abandoned garden of the Montgomery mansion, in the heart of the Upper East Side in New York. Emily walked barefoot through the cold corridors, her steps echoing against the cracked marble that was once a symbol of prestige. At 22, she had grown up among ghosts of a golden era that she never truly knew. The faded tapestries told stories of balls and laughter that had been lost to time, while the portraits framed in tarnished gold observed her every movement with eyes that seemed to keep secrets. Her mother, Eleanor, remained seated in the red, velvet armchair in the library, as she had done every afternoon for as long as Emily could remember. Elegant even in decay, she wore dresses that cost fortunes decades ago and now hung loosely on her frail body. She never spoke of the past, never explained why they lived alone in that house that seemed more like a mausoleum, never justified the evasive looks when Emily asked about the father she had never known. That Thursday afternoon, something was different. Eleanor held a sealed envelope with a golden crest that Emily didn't recognize. Her fingers trembled imperceptibly as she handled the superior quality cream paper. Silence hung in the air, like a storm about to break. "Sit down, my daughter," said Eleanor, her voice carrying an icy sweetness that made Emily's stomach contract. "We need to talk about your future." Emily obeyed, settling into the leather chair that creaked under her weight. The smell of mold mixed with her mother's expensive and old perfume created a suffocating atmosphere. Through the hazy window, she could see the modern buildings surrounding their island of decay, constantly reminding her that the world had moved on while they remained trapped in the past. "You're getting married," announced Eleanor, opening the envelope with precise movements. "The marriage has been arranged. It's the only way to save what's left of our family." The words hit Emily like stones. Arranged marriage in the 21st century. She had always known her mother carried antiquated traditions, but this surpassed any limits of reality. "Mother, that's impossible. I can't marry someone I don't even know," she protested, feeling her hands getting sweaty. "We're in 2024, not the 18th century. Eleanor took a black and white photograph from the envelope. A young man, perhaps in his early 30s, looked directly at the camera with a disturbing intensity. Dark hair, defined jawline, eyes that seemed to penetrate the soul of whoever observed them. There was something dangerous about that face, a dark beauty that made the heart race and reason retreat. "Caleb Montgomery," said Eleanor, her voice acquiring an almost religious reverence, "real estate billionaire, specializing in the restoration of historic properties around the world, has an estimated fortune of $2 billion and influence in more than 15 countries." Emily studied the photograph, trying to decipher what lay behind those dark eyes. The man wore an impeccable suit, but it wasn't the clothes that caught attention. It was his posture, the way he held his shoulders, as if he carried the weight of the world and yet refused to bend. "And why would he agree to marry me?" she asked, genuinely confused. "We're practically poor, Mother. This house is mortgaged. We have no money, no status. What would a billionaire gain from this?" Eleanor looked away for the first time in the conversation, fixing her gaze on the heavy curtains that blocked the natural light. Her lips contracted into a thin line, as they always did when some subject touched old wounds. "There are debts that transcend money, Emily. Commitments that were made long before you were born. Your marriage to Caleb Montgomery is the way to settle everything our family owes." "What debts? What are you talking about?" But Eleanor had already stood up, putting the photograph back in the envelope. Her movements were rigid, mechanical, like those of a broken doll trying to maintain composure. "The wedding will be next Friday at St. Benedict's Chapel. Small ceremony, just the necessary witnesses. I've already arranged your dress. It's the same one I wore at my wedding to your father." Emily felt the world collapse around her. 1 week. She had just 1 week before her life was handed over to a complete stranger, A man who, from the eyes in the photograph, seemed capable of both protecting and destroying anyone who came near. "I won't accept this," she declared, standing up abruptly. "I'm not a commodity to be negotiated. If our family has debts, we'll find another way to settle them." Eleanor turned slowly, and for the first time, Emily saw fear in her eyes. Genuine, primitive fear, like that of a cornered animal. "You don't understand, my daughter. There is no other way. Caleb Montgomery is not the kind of man who accepts no for an answer. If we refuse, we'll lose much more than this house." Something in her mother's voice made Emily take a step back. There were stories there, secrets buried so deep that not even decades had managed to completely erase their marks. And for the first time, she realized that perhaps she was just a piece in a much bigger, much more dangerous game than she had ever imagined. That night, as rain beat against the windows of her room, Emily held Caleb Montgomery's photograph against the light of the lamp. She tried to imagine what it would be like to be beside that man, what it would be like to be touched by those hands, to be seen by those eyes that seemed to know all the secrets of the world. A strange mixture of fear and curiosity took hold of her chest. In 7 days her life would change forever, and, strangely, a small and dangerous part of her soul whispered that perhaps this was exactly what she had always been waiting for. The following days passed like a blur of silent preparations and unspoken tensions. Emily tried to research Caleb Montgomery on the internet, but found only superficial information. Successful businessman, architecture graduate from Cambridge University, specialist in historical heritage restoration, single. Photos in business magazines always showed the same impassive face, the same controlled posture, as if he were incapable of showing any genuine emotion. What intrigued her most were the silences. 3 previous relationships vaguely mentioned. In social columns, all abruptly ended without public explanations. An ex-fiancé who simply disappeared from the social spotlight overnight. Women who seemed to have been erased from existence after becoming involved with him. On Wednesday, 2 days before the wedding, Emily was organizing the few belongings she would take when she heard the sound of a luxury car parking in front of the mansion. From the second-floor window, she saw a gleaming black Bentley, as out of place on that decaying street as a diamond amidst coal. The door opened, and he emerged. Caleb Montgomery was even more imposing in person than in the photograph. Tall, easily 6'1", he wore a dark grey suit that probably cost more than her family spent in 6 months. His movements were calculated, precise, like those of a predator who knows exactly his own power. When he raised his eyes to the window where Emily was, she felt an electric shock run down her spine. He smiled. It wasn't a warm or reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion. Emily ran down the stairs, her heart beating erratically. Her mother was already at the door, receiving him with a deference that bordered on submission. Eleanor seemed to have physically shrunk in his presence, as if her very existence depended on the approval of that man. "Mr. Montgomery," said Eleanor, making a small bow that mortified Emily. "It's an honor to receive you in our home." "Miss Helena," replied Caleb, his deep and controlled voice carrying a slightly international accent, the result of years living between different countries. "I hope I'm not disturbing. I would like to meet my future wife before the ceremony." His eyes met Emily's, and she felt as if she were being X-rayed. There was a sharp intelligence there, but also something darker, a hunger she couldn't define. He studied her from head to toe in an unabashed way, not as a man evaluating a woman, but as a connoisseur examining a work of art he intends to acquire. "Emily," he said, extending his hand, "pleasure to finally meet you." She hesitated before accepting the greeting. His hand was warm, strong, with calluses that betrayed someone who not only commanded, but also worked with his own hands. The touch lingered a few seconds longer than necessary, and Emily felt an electric current travel up her arm. "The pleasure is mine," she lied, forcing a polite smile. Caleb laughed, a low and disturbing sound that echoed through the empty corridors. "Of the mansion." "Liar," he said simply, without apparent malice. I like that. Honesty is overrated. Eleanor quickly intervened, clearly nervous about the direction of the conversation. Why don't you go to the library? You can talk with more privacy while I prepare the tea. Emily wanted to protest, but something in her mother's look stopped her. There was desperation there, a silent plea for her to cooperate. Reluctantly, she guided Caleb to the library, extremely conscious of his physical presence behind her. The library, with its dusty shelves and antique furniture, seemed to shrink with his entry. Caleb examined the environment with expert eyes, touching the spines of books, evaluating the quality of the furniture, as if cataloguing each item. "Beautiful collection," he commented, removing a leather-bound volume. "First edition of Hemingway. Must be worth about $5,000 in the current market." "Do you collect books?" asked Emily, surprised by his knowledge. "I collect many things," he replied vaguely, "especially those that have history that carry the weight of time." His eyes fixed on her again. "Like you." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something predatory in the way he looked at her, as if he could see through all her defenses. "You don't know me well enough to make that kind of statement," she retorted, trying to keep her voice firm. "Oh, but I do," he said, approaching a few steps. "I've known your mother for a long time. Through her, I know you too. I know you grew up isolated in this house, that you never had a serious relationship, that you dream of being a writer, but never had the courage to submit your texts for publication. I know you read Gothic romance in secret, that you prefer tea to coffee, that you have a small scar on your left knee from when you fell off your bicycle at 7 years old." Emily instinctively backed away, the blood freezing in her veins. How did he know all this? How did he know intimate details of her? Life that not even close people knew? "You investigated me," she accused, her voice coming out higher than intended. "Naturally. I always research my acquisitions before investing." The words came out with a calculated coldness that made it clear he had carefully chosen each one of them. Acquisitions. The word came out like a slap. Caleb smiled again, that same smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Forgive me, I meant partners. The business world sometimes contaminates our way of talking about personal relationships." But Emily hadn't been fooled. He had said exactly what he meant to say. For him, she was an acquisition, an object to be possessed and controlled. "And if I refuse to marry you?" she asked, raising her chin in defiance. Caleb came even closer, now close enough for her to smell his expensive perfume mixed with something more masculine and primitive. He raised his hand and touched her face with surprising delicacy, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You won't refuse," he said, his voice low and hypnotic, "because deep down you want to know how far this can go. You want to discover who you really are when all your little defenses are removed." Emily should have backed away, should have slapped that presumptuous hand. Instead, she found herself paralyzed by the touch, by the proximity, by the intensity of those dark eyes that seemed to see her naked soul. "You don't know me," she whispered, but even to her own ears the denial sounded weak. "Not yet," he agreed, his thumb now tracing her lower lip. "But I will. Every thought, every desire, every fear. I will know you better than you know yourself." And then, before she could react, he stepped away as if nothing had happened, leaving her with tingling skin and a racing heart. "Until Friday, Emily," he said, heading for the door. "Wear white. I like the old traditions." She heard his steps, echoing down the corridor, heard the polite goodbye to her mother, heard the Bentley leave. But she remained standing in the library for long minutes, unconsciously touching her face where he had touched her, trying to understand why, despite the fear. A dangerous part of her could hardly wait for Friday. Friday arrived like an inevitable sentence. Emily woke before dawn, her stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and something she refused to name as expectation. Her mother's wedding dress hung in the closet like a ghost waiting to possess her. It was a vintage piece from the 80s, with long sleeves of French lace and a modest train, yellowed by time but still preserving its melancholic elegance. Eleanor entered the room without knocking, carrying an old jewelry box. Her hands visibly trembled as she removed a pearl necklace and matching earrings. "These jewels belong to your grandmother," she said, her voice weaker than normal. "She always said that one day you would wear them at your wedding." Emily observed her mother in the dressing table mirror as Eleanor arranged her hair in a low, elegant bun. There was something funeral-like about these preparations, as if they were dressing a body for the wake. "Mother," said Emily softly, taking Eleanor's cold hand, "tell me the truth. Why is this marriage so important? What really happened in the past?" Eleanor froze, the comb suspended in the air. Her eyes filled with tears that she refused to shed. "Some truths are too heavy to be carried by two people," she murmured. "Today you marry a good man, rich, influential, capable of taking care of you better than I managed to." "Good man?" Emily turned in the chair. "Mother, you saw how he looked at me, like I was property to be acquired." "All powerful men are like that at first," said Eleanor, looking away. "You have to earn their respect. Your father was also intense." It was the first time her mother had mentioned her father so directly. Emily felt she was about to discover something important, but a car honking outside interrupted the moment. St. Benedict's Chapel was practically empty, as promised. Just a few witnesses Emily didn't recognize, men in dark suits who looked more like bodyguards than guests. The priest was an elderly man with a solemn expression, clearly uncomfortable with the tense atmosphere of the ceremony. Caleb was waiting for her at the altar, impeccable in a black suit that emphasized his imposing height. When she began to walk down the aisle with hesitant steps, he didn't take his eyes off her for a second. There was no visible emotion on his face, neither joy nor nervousness, not even satisfaction. Just a predatory concentration that made Emily feel like prey voluntarily walking into the trap. The ceremony was mechanical, devoid of the joy that should characterize a wedding. There were no personal vows, romantic music, or warm smiles. The priest recited the traditional words with evident haste, as if he wanted to get it over with quickly. Caleb responded to the vows with a firm and controlled voice, while Emily murmured her responses like a student memorizing a lesson. When the time came for the kiss, Caleb held her face between his hands with a possessiveness that made her heart race. The kiss was long, deep, more intimate than she had expected. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the circumstances, lost herself in the sensation of his lips against hers, in the way his hands held her as if she were simultaneously fragile and precious. When they separated, she saw something different in his eyes, a flash of genuine satisfaction, as if he had just confirmed something important. The farewell to Eleanor was brief and strangely formal. Her mother hugged her quickly, whispering in her ear, "Be strong, my daughter, and remember, sometimes to survive we must become what we most fear." Before Emily could ask what that meant, Caleb was already leading her out of the church, his hand firm at the small of her back. The private jet was waiting at LaGuardia Airport. It was an imposing machine, all in black and gold, with the Montgomery crest discreetly but unmistakably displayed on the sides. The interior was too luxurious to be real: cream leather seats, mahogany finishes, a small kitchen that looked more like a five-star restaurant. "Where are we going?" asked Emily, nervously settling into one of the seats. "California," replied Caleb, serving himself an aged whiskey that probably cost more than a minimum wage. "I have a property in the Sonoma region. I thought it would be an appropriate place for our honeymoon." Honeymoon. The words left his mouth with a naturalness that contrasted with the artificiality of that whole situation. As if they were really a couple in love departing for a romantic trip, and not two people who met 3 days ago, participating in an elaborate transaction. During the flight, Caleb worked on his laptop, making calls in English, French, and Spanish, with a fluency that evidenced years of international business. Emily pretended to sleep, but was actually observing him through half-closed eyelids. There was a contained energy in him, like that of a temporarily domesticated wild animal. Even when he seemed relaxed, his muscles remained tense, ready for action. They landed in Napa Valley at the end of the California afternoon, where a black limousine was waiting for them. The driver, a gray-haired man with a serious expression, treated Caleb with a reverence that bordered on fear. They spoke quickly in hushed tones, and Emily caught only scattered words. chateau, security, preparations. The road wound through lavender fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sweet and relaxing perfume entered through the open windows, creating an almost surreal atmosphere of pastoral beauty. Emily began to relax for the first time in days, admiring the golden landscape bathed by the late afternoon light. It was then that the chateau appeared around the bend in the road. It wasn't just a house. It was a restored medieval fortress, with stone towers that rose against the violet sky, walls that seemed impenetrable, and windows that shone like vigilant eyes. Beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like a fairy tale written by someone with nightmares. "It's magnificent," murmured Emily, genuinely impressed. "12th century," said Caleb with evident pride. "It took me 5 years to restore it completely. Each stone was treated individually, each historical detail preserved. It's one of my most important works." The car stopped in front of the main gate, a massive structure of wood and wrought iron that opened automatically upon their arrival. Employees emerged from inside the chateau like apparitions, middle-aged men and women, uniformed, who bowed respectfully when Caleb emerged from the limousine. He offered his hand to help her out of the car, and Emily realized she was trembling, slightly, not from cold but from an anticipation that she couldn't define as fear or excitement. "Welcome to your new home," said Caleb, his voice low and loaded with intentions that she didn't yet fully understand. As they crossed the courtyard of centuries-old stones towards the main entrance, Emily had the strange sensation that she was entering something much bigger than a simple marriage. It was as if she were crossing a dimensional threshold, leaving behind not only her previous life, but her own identity. The chateau awaited her in silence, its ancient walls ready to witness another chapter of a story that she suspected had begun long before her birth. The interior of the chateau was even more impressive than its imposing facade. Emily followed Caleb through corridors adorned with authentic medieval tapestries, their vibrant colors restored with a perfection that bordered on obsessive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, projecting golden light onto furniture that seemed to have been touched by the very kings who once inhabited those rooms. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The flowers in the vases were changed daily, always white, lilies, roses, gardenias, creating a constant and intoxicating perfume that floated through the air like an invisible mist. The polished marble floors reflected their steps, multiplying the sound into ghostly echoes that seemed to whisper secrets in the centuries-old walls. "Mrs. Montgomery," said a middle-aged woman with a heavy southern accent, emerging from a side door like a materialized shadow. She was thin, elegant, with grey hair tied in an impeccable bun, and eyes that showed no emotion. "I'm Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper. I hope your journey was comfortable." Emily nodded, still absorbing the grandeur around her. "Very comfortable. Thank you. Mrs. Davis will take care of all your needs," explained Caleb, his hand possessively resting on Emily's waist. "She's managed the house for 15 years. She knows every stone of this place better than I do." There was something in the way he said this, an insinuation that Mrs. Davis knew more than just the architecture of the chateau. The woman maintained her neutral expression, but Emily caught a flash of something, pity, warning, in her dark eyes. "Would you like to see your chambers?" asked Caleb, guiding her towards a spiral stone staircase. "I imagine you're tired from the journey." The chambers occupied the entire east wing of the second floor. It was a suite that looked more like a luxury apartment, with a master bedroom, private bathroom with hand-carved marble bathtub, closet, and a small office with a view of the lavender fields, all decorated in cream and gold tones, with furniture that perfectly combined classic elegance with modern comfort. But what caught Emily's attention most was the complete absence of her personal belongings. Her few clothes, books, and personal objects that she had brought from New York were nowhere to be found. "Where are my things?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "I've provided a new wardrobe," replied Caleb, opening the closet doors. "Clothes more suitable for your new lifestyle." Emily was breathless. The closet was filled with dresses, skirts, blouses, shoes, and accessories that cost fortunes, all in neutral colors, white, cream, beige, pearl gray, as if she were a doll, being dressed according to her owner's taste. Brands she had only seen in fashion magazines: Chanel, Dior, Valentino, Saint Laurent. "And my old clothes?" she insisted, a strange chill spreading through her chest. "They were donated," he said simply. "They didn't match who you are now." The coldness of the statement hit her like a slap. Her clothes weren't luxurious, but they were hers. Each piece carried memories, moments of her life that had now been simply discarded as unnecessary trash. "And my books. My diary?" Caleb approached, his eyes darkening slightly. "Your books are in the chateau's library. As for the diary—" He paused, studying her reaction. "I thought it better that you start a new phase without carrying the weight of the past." Emily felt her blood freeze. Her diary contained her most intimate thoughts, her dreams, her fears. It was the only truly private thing she possessed, and he had simply destroyed it as if it were trash. "You had no right," she said, her voice trembling with contained anger. "I have every right," he replied, his voice acquiring a dangerous coldness. "You are my wife now. Everything you were before ceased to exist the moment you said 'I do' in that chapel." The declaration hung in the air between them like a sentence. Emily realized it wasn't just a figure of speech. He really believed he owned her, that he had the right to completely redefine who she was. "I'll leave you to rest," said Caleb, heading for the door. "Dinner will be served at 8. Mrs. Davis will come to help you dress." "I know how to dress myself," Emily retorted, her wounded pride giving strength to her voice. Caleb stopped at the door, turning with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course you do. But tonight is special. Our first night as husband and wife. I want everything to be perfect." After he left, Emily sat heavily on the king-size bed, the weight of reality finally crashing down on her. She was trapped. Not physically, not yet, but in all other possible ways. Without money, without documents besides the passport that was probably in Caleb's possession, without means of communication with the outside world in a foreign region, whose language she barely mastered. At 7:30, Mrs. Davis knocked discreetly at the door, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but there was something in her movements that suggested haste, urgency. "Madame has chosen your dress for dinner," she said, removing a white silk dress from the wardrobe that looked more like an elegant shroud. "Mr. Montgomery has specific preferences." Emily reluctantly accepted the dress, noticing how Mrs. Davis avoided direct eye contact. There was something the woman wanted to say but couldn't, a coded message in her careful gestures. "Mrs. Davis," said Emily impulsively, "how long have you worked for Mr. Montgomery?" The woman hesitated, her hand stopping in the middle of arranging the pillows on the bed. 15 years, ma'am. Since he bought the chateau. And do you like working here?" Another moment of hesitation, longer this time. Mrs. Davis finally raised her eyes, and Emily saw something that made her swallow hard. Fear. Genuine and carefully controlled. Fear. "Mr. Montgomery is a generous employer," she said finally, each word chosen with extreme care. "He always treats us with respect, as long as we respect his rules." Mrs. Davis quickly headed for the door. "Dinner is at 8 o'clock sharp, ma'am. It's important not to be late." Left alone again, Emily put on the silk dress with mechanical movements. The fabric was wonderful against her skin, but it felt like a uniform, as if she were preparing to play a role in a play whose script she didn't know. In front of the bathroom mirror, she combed her loose hair over her shoulders, applied a soft rose lipstick, and wondered if she recognized the woman who stared back. She looked more sophisticated, more elegant, but also more vulnerable, as if all her strength had been drained along with her previous identity. At 8 o'clock sharp, she went down to the dining room. Caleb was waiting for her beside a table, set for two, with lit candles, gleaming crystals, and white flowers scattered like offerings on an altar. He wore a dark suit without a tie, the first button of his shirt open, and when he saw her coming down the stairs, his eyes lit up with a predatory approval that made Emily's stomach contract. "Perfect," he murmured, offering her his arm. "Exactly, as I imagined." As he led her to the chair, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had just taken the first step towards an abyss from which she might never be able to return. Dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance between predator and prey. Caleb served the California wine with precise movements, his eyes never leaving Emily's face for more than a few seconds. The food was exquisite: foie gras, lamb with herbal sauce, artisanal cheeses that melted on the tongue. But she could barely savor anything under the weight of that constant gaze. "Tell me about your plans," said Caleb, cutting a piece of meat with surgical precision. "Now that you no longer need to worry about financial matters, you can dedicate yourself to what you truly desire." "My plans?" repeated Emily, surprised by the question. "I don't know if I understand." "Your dreams, your passions." He paused, taking a sip of the red wine. "Your mother mentioned you always wanted to be a writer." The mention of her mother brought a pang of longing mixed with resentment. How did Eleanor know about her most secret dreams, and why had she shared this information with a complete stranger? "I write some short stories," she admitted reluctantly. "Nothing professional." "I would like to read them," he said, and it didn't sound like a request. "I have contacts in the publishing market. I can help publish your work." Emily put her fork on the plate, her appetite completely disappearing. The idea of Caleb reading her most intimate writings, judging them, possibly modifying them according to his criteria, made her feel physically sick. "Thank you, but I prefer to do that on my own." "If I ever decide to publish—" Caleb's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. It was the first time she had directly contradicted him, and he clearly wasn't accustomed to refusals. "As you wish," he said finally, but there was a new coldness in his voice. That didn't go unnoticed. The rest of the dinner passed in a tense silence, interrupted only by the sound of silverware against fine porcelain. Emily felt the weight of the night approaching, the inevitability of what would come next weighing on her chest like a stone. When they finished dessert, a chocolate soufflé that she barely touched, Caleb stood up and extended his hand. "Shall we go to our chambers?" The question was asked in a casual tone, but there was an expectation in his eyes that made Emily's heart race dangerously. She accepted his hand with trembling fingers, allowing herself to be guided through the candlelit corridors to the private elevator that led to the main chambers. During the silent ascent, Emily realized she wasn't being taken back to the room where she had gotten ready. These chambers were larger, more luxurious, decorated in masculine tones of brown and gold. It was clearly Caleb's room, and she would be expected to share it. "I hope you like it," he said, noticing her hesitation. "I had it redecorated especially for our arrival." The room was dominated by a king-size bed with a carved wooden canopy that seemed to have belonged to some medieval king. Persian rugs covered the stone floor, and a fireplace was already lit, projecting dancing shadows on the walls. It was beautiful and romantic, but also intimidating, like a scenario set up for a conquest. Caleb went to the private bar in the UE corner of the room, serving 2 glasses of cognac without asking if she wanted any. "To calm the nerves," he said, offering her one of the glasses. Emily accepted the drink, but didn't drink. Her hands trembled slightly, and she knew he had noticed. "You're afraid," observed Caleb. "Not as a question, but as a clinical observation." "Should I be?" she retorted, surprising herself with her own courage. He smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the smile of someone who appreciated a challenge. "That depends entirely on you," he said, approaching slowly. "I can be very gentle with those who cooperate." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Emily instinctively backed away until her back touched the cold wall. Caleb continued approaching until he was right in front of her, so close that she could feel the heat of his body, the expensive perfume mixed with something more primitive and masculine. "Please," she whispered, unsure of what she was asking. Caleb raised his hand and touched her face with surprising delicacy, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Please what? Continue or stop?" Emily closed her eyes, trying to organize her confused thoughts. A part of her, a small but insistent part, was curious, wanted to know what it would be like to be touched by that dangerous man. Another part, larger and more rational, wanted to run away from those dark eyes that seemed to see her naked soul. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Honesty," murmured Caleb, his voice low and hypnotic. "I like that. Most women lie, pretend things they don't feel to please or to get what they want." He stepped back a few paces, giving her space to breathe. "I won't force you," he said, and for the first time since they met, she believed he was being completely sincere. "But I also won't pretend that this marriage is just a commercial formality. There is attraction between us, Emily. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you breathe when I come close." She wanted to deny it, but knew it would be an obvious lie. There was indeed a magnetic and disturbing attraction between them, a type of chemistry she had never experienced before. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than intended. Caleb walked to the window, looking at the lavender fields bathed by moonlight. "I want to know you. Really, not the polite and contained version that you present to the world, but the real woman who hides behind that mask of fragility." He turned to face her again. "And I want you to know me too, to understand that I am not just the cold and calculating man that I appear to be." "And if I discover that I don't like what I find," she challenged, "then at least you'll know the truth," he responded simply. "And the truth, however painful it may be, is always preferable to comfortable lies." Emily studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or falsehood. But there was something different in his expression, a carefully controlled vulnerability that she hadn't seen before. "And if you don't like what you discover about me?" she asked. Caleb smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "Impossible," he said with a confidence that should have sounded arrogant, but strangely reassured her. "I've seen enough to know that you are exactly the type of woman I've always looked for." "What type of woman?" "One who doesn't break easily," he answered. "One who can challenge me without being intimidated. One who can walk by my side as an equal, not as a shadow." The words touched something deep inside Emily, a part of herself that she didn't even know existed. All her life she had been protected, treated as fragile, kept away from the dangers of the real world. But there was a strength inside her that had always felt suffocated by all this protection. "Tonight," said Caleb softly, "sleep alone, in the room I prepared for you. Tomorrow, when you're ready, when you really want to be here, come to me." He approached again, but this time only to kiss her forehead, with a tenderness that left her completely disconcerted. "Good night, Emily. Welcome to the first day of the rest of your life." Alone in the corridor, walking back to her chambers, Emily realized her legs were trembling, not from fear, she realized with surprise, but from an anticipation that she couldn't name, a dangerous curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. Emily woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. It was still early. The sun was just beginning to filter through the silk curtains, tinting the room with a golden ethereal light. She had slept poorly, her dreams populated by confusing images of dark eyes and hands that touched her with a delicacy that contrasted with the predatory intensity of the gaze. An envelope had been slipped under her door during the night. Superior quality cream paper, without external identification. With trembling fingers she opened it, finding only a few lines written in elegant masculine handwriting. "The chateau has many secrets. Some are hidden in the third-floor library. Family history section. Others in the photographs of the East Gallery. If you want to understand why you're here, start with these 2 clues. But remember, some truths change everything. See." Emily reread the note 3 times, trying to decipher the intentions behind the carefully chosen words. Was it an invitation, a test, or simply another way for Caleb to exercise control, this time through curiosity? Mrs. Davis brought breakfast, punctually at 8. Fresh croissants, homemade raspberry jam, strong coffee, and a small vase with a single white rose. The woman seemed even more tense than the day before, her movements rigid and eyes constantly darting to the door as if expecting someone to appear. "Mrs. Davis," said Emily impulsively, "where is my husband this morning?" The woman hesitated, arranging and rearranging the plates on the tray. "Mr. Montgomery left early for Napa. Urgent business. He'll return only at the end of the afternoon." There was something in her voice, an inflection that suggested that this absence had been planned. Caleb had purposely left the field clear for her to explore the chateau, following the clues he had provided. After Mrs. Davis left, Emily dressed quickly in a beige silk blouse and a midi skirt she found in the closet. Everything fit her body perfectly, as if it had been made to measure. The precision with which Caleb had anticipated even her dress size was simultaneously impressive and disturbing. The third floor of the chateau was a region she had not yet explored. The staircase leading there was narrower, older, as if it were a later addition to the original structure. The corridor was long and poorly lit, with closed doors on both sides that remained silent as tombs. The library was at the end of the corridor, a circular room with shelves that extended from the floor to the vaulted ceiling. Books in English, French, Italian, German, an impressive collection that evidenced decades of careful curation. But it was the family history section that made her stop abruptly. Entire shelves dedicated to the Montgomery clan, with leather-bound volumes that dated back centuries, genealogies, family correspondence, legal documents yellowed by time, and, there among the more recent books, she found a photo album that made her heart race. The first photo showed a mature man with dark hair and penetrating gaze, clearly Caleb's father by the similar features. Beside him, a blonde woman of dazzling beauty whom she couldn't recognize. But it was the third person in the photograph that made the blood freeze in her veins. It was her mother, a younger version, radiant, smiling with a genuine happiness that Emily had never seen on her melancholic face. Eleanor wore a yellow summer dress, her hair loose in the wind, one hand resting familiarly on the arm of the man she now knew to be Caleb's father. The following pages revealed a story that her mother had hidden for more than 2 decades. Photos of elegant dinners, trips to paradise beaches, intimate moments captured in flowering gardens. Her mother and Anthony Montgomery, the name was carefully inscribed under several photographs, clearly shared much more than a simple friendship. Emily sat heavily in an antique armchair, her hands trembling as she turned the pages. There were dates on the photographs. The oldest dated 25 years ago, the most recent 23. Exactly the period that preceded her birth. Interesting. Reading, said a voice behind her. Emily turned her head abruptly, finding Caleb standing at the entrance to the library. He had returned earlier than expected, and by the gleam in his eyes he knew exactly what she had discovered. "You knew," she accused, her voice hoarse with shock. "You knew from the beginning." Caleb approached slowly, his hands crossed behind his back in a posture that she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of when he was about to reveal something important. "I knew that my father and your mother had a relationship," he confirmed simply. "A relationship that destroyed my family and apparently yours as well." Emily closed the album abruptly, as if she could erase the images she had seen. "Is that why you married me? Some kind of twisted revenge?" "In the beginning, perhaps," admitted Caleb, surprising her with his honesty. "When I discovered that Eleanor had a daughter, I thought it would be a poetic form of justice, taking back what my family had lost. And now?" Caleb stopped in front of the window, looking at the lavender fields that stretched to the horizon. "Now I realize that you are not responsible for your mother's sins, and that perhaps this situation is an opportunity for both of us." "Opportunity? For what?" He turned to face her, his eyes loaded with an intensity that made her tremble. "To discover if we are capable of building something real amidst so much artifice, to see if we can become more than just victims of the choices our parents made." Emily stood up abruptly, needing distance to process everything she was discovering. "My mother lied to me my entire life," she said, more to herself than to him. "About my father, about the past, about the reasons for our poverty." "She protected you," said Caleb softly, "from the scandal, from the guilt, from the consequences of choices that were hers, not yours." "And the woman in the photograph? The blonde beside your father?" Caleb's face visibly hardened. "My mother, Isabella Montgomery. She died 3 years after those photographs were taken. How? Sleeping pill overdose, accidental, according to the official report. But I was there that night. I saw the despair in her eyes when she discovered about Eleanor. The confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Emily realized she was at the center of a family tragedy that had unfolded even before her birth, and that her marriage was just the last act of a drama that had begun decades ago. "Why show me all this?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Why reveal your true motivations?" Caleb walked until he was very close to her but didn't touch her. There was a restraint in his movements that suggested an internal battle. "Because I lied when I said I wanted to know you. The truth is that I've known you for a long time. I've been observing you and your mother for years, waiting for the right moment." Emily's blood froze. "Observing me how?" "Discreetly. Occasional reports about your life, your habits, your aspirations. I knew about your dreams of being a writer even before your mother mentioned it." The revelation hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her entire life had been an illusion of privacy, while she was studied like a laboratory specimen by this man who was now her husband. "Are you telling me I've been spied on for years?" "Protected," corrected Caleb. "And studied, yes. I needed to be sure that you were who I thought you were. And who did you think I was?" For the first time since they met, she saw something that seemed like genuine vulnerability in his eyes. Someone strong enough to survive the truth. Someone capable of seeing me as I really am and still choosing to stay. Emily backed away until her back touched the bookshelf, needing physical support to bear the weight of all the revelations. "And if I choose to leave?" Caleb smiled, but it wasn't a cruel smile. It was sad, resigned, like someone who had already considered that possibility and prepared for it. "Then you leave. I'm not my father, Emily. I won't destroy more lives because of obsessions." The sincerity in his voice disconcerted her more than any threat could have done. Suddenly she realized she had a real choice, perhaps the first truly free choice of her entire life. Emily spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through the chateau's gardens, trying to process the magnitude of the revelations. The lavender fields extended infinitely around the property, creating a purple sea that gently undulated with the breeze. It was too beautiful to be real, like everything in that place, an artificial perfection that hid dark truths beneath its seductive surface. Caleb didn't try to follow her or force more conversations. He respected her need for space, which somehow disturbed her more than if he had been possessive. She was beginning to realize that he was much more complex than she had initially imagined, capable of both calculated manipulation and genuine consideration. When she returned to the chateau at dusk, she found Mrs. Davis waiting for her in the main hall with a tense expression. "Mrs. Montgomery," said the housekeeper, using her full new title for the first time. "There's a call for you from New York." Emily's heart accelerated. Her mother was the only person in New York who knew where she was, and Eleanor never called anywhere without an urgent reason. The phone was in Caleb's office, a masculine environment, dominated by dark mahogany furniture and shelves filled with technical books on architecture and business. Emily hesitated before answering, instinctively knowing that this call would change something fundamental. "Emily?" Her mother's voice sounded weak and distant through the international line. "Mother, what happened?" A long silence followed, punctuated only by static noises. "I need to tell you some things," Eleanor finally said. "Things I should have told you a long time ago, but didn't have the courage." "About you and Caleb's father?" said Emily, deciding to be direct. "I already know, Mother. I found the photographs." She heard her mother sigh deeply, a sound loaded with relief and regret. "Then you know I lied about everything. About who your father was, about why we lived isolated, about the reasons for your arranged marriage. Who is my real father, Mother?" Another silence, this one longer and heavier. "Anthony Montgomery," admitted Eleanor, her voice breaking slightly. "Caleb, there's your half-brother." The words hit Emily like lightning. The phone almost slipped from her hands as she tried to absorb the information. Half-brother. She had married her half-brother. "My God," she whispered, feeling nausea rise in her throat. "Mother, what have you done?" "Anthony didn't know," said Eleanor quickly, as if this mitigated the magnitude of the situation. "When I discovered I was pregnant, he had already returned to Isabella. I didn't want to destroy his marriage by telling the truth. And Caleb, does he know? I don't know. Anthony died without knowing he had another daughter. But Caleb was always very intelligent, very investigative. It's possible he discovered. Emily let herself fall heavily into the leather chair behind the desk, her legs unable to support her. If Caleb knew they were half-siblings and still married her, what did that make him? And what did it make her, who had felt attraction for him? "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice coming out weaker than intended. "Because I received a visit today. A woman who said she had been married to Caleb. She told me things that made me realize how much you might be in danger." Emily's blood froze. "What woman?" "Victoria Ross, Italian. Said she was Caleb's second wife before you." Emily frowned. In the research she had done on Caleb, she hadn't found any record of a previous marriage, just relationships that ended badly. What did she say? That Caleb has an unhealthy obsession with control, that he manipulates and molds the women he relates to until they completely lose their own identity, and that when they resist or try to leave, what, mother? They disappear or are committed to psychiatric institutions with false diagnoses of mental breakdowns. Emily remembered Caleb's words about his ex-partners, about relationships that ended in emotional collapses. Could it be that they hadn't been natural collapses, but situations forced by him? "Mother, I need to get out of here," she said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the panic growing in her chest. "Victoria said it's almost impossible. He controls all aspects of his wives' lives, documents, money, contacts, and the chateau. Where you are is completely isolated. Then what can I do? She'll try to help. Said she knows people who can get you out of there discreetly, but you need to be very careful. If Caleb suspects..." The line was cut abruptly. Emily stayed listening to the dial tone for several seconds, trying to process if the call had dropped, or if it had been purposely interrupted. Interesting conversation. Emily turned abruptly, finding Caleb standing at the entrance to the office. He had returned without making noise, and by the gleam in his eyes, it was evident that he had heard at least part of the conversation. "My mother was worried about..." "Me," she said, trying to sound natural. I'm sure she was. Caleb entered the office and closed the door behind him. And what did Eleanor have so urgent to tell? Emily hesitated. Should she confront him about the revelation that they were half-siblings, or would it be safer to pretend she didn't know? "Homesickness," she lied. "She wanted to know how I'm adapting." Caleb walked until he was behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. The touch, which before provoked shivers of excitement, now made her feel physically sick. "And how would you say you're adapting?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. "Well," she responded automatically. "Lie," he said softly, his hands slightly tightening on her shoulders. "You discovered something today that deeply disturbed you. I can feel the tension in your muscles, see the fear in your eyes." Emily tried to stand up, but his hands kept her in place with a pressure that, though not violent, made it clear that she would only move when he allowed. "Caleb, please." "Victoria contacted your mother, didn't she?" he said, and it wasn't a question. "I imagined she would eventually try to interfere." Emily's blood froze. He knew about Victoria, knew about the call, probably knew about everything. "Who is Victoria?" she asked, deciding there was no longer any reason to pretend. "My ex-wife," Caleb answered simply. "A woman who never accepted the end of our marriage and who has dangerous fantasies about sabotaging me." "Fantasies? Or is she trying to warn me about something real?" Caleb laughed, a humorless sound that echoed off the walls of the office. "Victoria. Spent 2 years in a psychiatric clinic in Oregon after our divorce. She suffers from persecutory delusions and paranoid tendencies. Anything she might have said about me should be viewed through that perspective." "And the other women? Your other relationships that ended badly?" Caleb's hands moved away from her shoulders, and she was finally able to stand up and turn to face him. "Each of them had their own problems, Emily. Emotional instability, chemical dependency, self-destructive tendencies. I tried to help them, but not everyone can be saved. There was something in the way he said this, a clinical coldness that made her realize that he really believed his own words. For Caleb, he was always the savior. The women were always the problematic ones. "And me?" she asked. "Am I problematic?" "Too." Caleb smiled, and for the first time she saw something genuinely affectionate in his expression. "You are different, stronger, smarter. That's why I chose you." "Chose me for what exactly?" "To be my equal, my companion, the mother of my children." The mention of children made her instinctively back away. The idea of being pregnant by her half-brother was too repugnant to contemplate. "I need some air," she said abruptly, heading for the door. "Emily," called Caleb, his voice acquiring an authority she hadn't heard before. "Don't leave the property. The fields around can be dangerous at night." She stopped with her hand on the doorknob, realizing that this hadn't been advice, but an order. When she turned to look at him one last time, she saw that the mask of charm had completely fallen. The man who stared at her was cold, calculating, and absolutely determined to maintain control over her. "Good night, Caleb," she said calmly, opening the door. "Good night, my dear wife," he replied. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we have much to talk about." The implicit threat echoed in her mind as she climbed the stairs to her chambers, knowing that her life had just become infinitely more dangerous. Emily couldn't sleep. She spent the entire night walking around the room, trying to organize her thoughts and plan an escape that seemed increasingly impossible. She was trapped in an isolated chateau, in a foreign state, married to a man who might be her half-brother and who clearly had dangerous controlling tendencies. At 3 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the corridor. They weren't the discreet steps of Mrs. Davis or the other employees. They were firm, determined, unmistakably masculine. Caleb was walking through the corridors, and by the sounds, he seemed to be checking all the doors. Emily held her breath. When the footsteps stopped in front of her door, the doorknob turned slowly, testing if it was locked. She had taken care to lock it, but realized with horror that this probably didn't matter. He must have keys to all the rooms in the chateau. To her surprise, he didn't enter. After a few seconds of tense silence, the footsteps moved away, continuing down the corridor. But the message had been sent clearly. He could enter whenever he wanted. Her privacy existed only while he allowed it. The following morning, Mrs. Davis brought coffee with an even tenser expression than usual. Her hands visibly trembled when she placed the tray on the table, and she completely avoided eye contact. "Mrs. Davis," said Emily impulsively, "I need to make a call to my family in New York." The woman froze, the coffee cup suspended in the... "There, sir. I'm sorry, ma'am, but the telephone lines are having technical problems. Mr. Montgomery is arranging for repairs." It was an obvious lie, but said with so much discomfort that Emily realized Mrs. Davis was just repeating instructions received. "And my cell phone. I can't connect to the internet. The region has signal problems, ma'am. It's very common in this part of Sonoma." Another lie. Emily had noticed that there were no visible cell towers in the surroundings, but a chateau of that standard would certainly have some type of satellite connection. Caleb had simply cut off all her communications with the outside world. "Where is my husband this morning?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Davis hesitated, her nervous hands rearranging items on the tray. "Mr. Montgomery is in the West Wing. He asked not to be disturbed until noon." After the housekeeper left, Emily made a decision. If she wanted to discover the truth about her situation, she would need to explore more of the chateau. The West Wing was a region she hadn't yet visited, and if Caleb was there busy, it might be her only opportunity. The West Wing was visibly older than the rest of the construction. The corridors were narrower, the walls bare stone in some stretches, as if this part of the chateau had been only partially restored. The air was heavy with humidity and a vaguely medicinal smell that made Emily wrinkle her nose. It was then that she heard voices coming from one of the rooms. One was unmistakably Caleb's, speaking in an authoritative tone. The other was female but weak, almost whispering. Emily approached the half-open door carefully, trying to understand the conversation. "Can't continue like this," said the female voice. It's been 3 years already. Please let me go. You know I can't do that, replied Caleb, his voice loaded with forced patience. Not while you're not completely recovered. I'm fine. I'm perfectly lucid. You know that. Victoria, we've already talked about this. Your episodes... Emily froze. Victoria, the ex-wife who was supposedly committed to a clinic in Oregon, was there in the chateau, apparently being held against her will. Gathering all her courage, she pushed the door a little more and was able to see inside the room. It was a luxurious room, but with discreet bars on the windows and a door that clearly locked from the outside. Victoria was a beautiful, dark-haired woman, but had a sickly paleness of someone who for a long time hadn't seen adequate sunlight. You brought another one, said Victoria, and there was deep sadness in her voice. The young Brazilian. Will you do to her the same thing you did to me? Emily is different, replied Caleb. She will understand, she will accept. They're always different at the beginning, said Victoria with a bitterness that broke Emily's heart, until they discover who you really are. Emily backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. She needed to get out of there before Caleb discovered her, but she also needed to process what she had just witnessed. Victoria wasn't a problematic ex-wife voluntarily committed. She was a prisoner. Who's there? Caleb's voice cut through the air like a blade. Emily froze, realizing she had been discovered. There was no reason to deny or pretend. He knew. She was there. The door opened completely, revealing Caleb with an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't anger nor surprise, it was disappointment, as if she had broken rules that he had clearly established. Emily, he said calmly, I believe you've gotten lost. Who is she? Asked Emily, deciding to be direct. Why is Victoria being kept here? Caleb sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed genuinely tired. Come in, he said, stepping aside to give her passage. Since you've discovered it, it's better that you understand the whole situation. Emily reluctantly entered the prison room. Victoria looked at her with a mixture of pity and despair, as if she were seeing her own fate repeat itself. Victoria suffers from psychotic episodes, explained Caleb, as if he were discussing the weather. She can seem perfectly normal for long periods, but then has episodes where she becomes violent, self-destructive. The best clinics in America couldn't help her. That's a lie, said Victoria, her voice gaining strength. Emily, he's lying. I've been here for 3 years, perfectly sane, being kept as a prisoner. You see, said Caleb sadly, this is one of the symptoms. Paranoia, delusions of persecution. She genuinely believes in her own version of reality. Emily looked between the two, trying to determine who was telling the truth. Victoria seemed desperate, but not crazy. Her eyes were clear, her speech coherent. Why isn't she in an official clinic? Asked Emily. Because we've already tried that, replied Caleb. She always manages to convince the doctors she's well, gets discharged, and then the episodes return. Here I can guarantee she receives constant and adequate care. Care? Said Victoria, her voice rising in tone. He keeps me isolated, monitors every movement, controls every aspect of my life. It's not care, it's psychological torture. I'll leave you to talk for a bit, said Caleb suddenly. Maybe Emily can calm her down. Sometimes a feminine presence helps. Before either of them could protest, he left the room, closing the door behind him. The unmistakable sound of the key turning in the lock echoed in the tense silence. Emily ran to the door, desperately pulling the handle, but it was useless. She was locked in with Victoria, and the terrible reality of her situation finally crystallized. Welcome to my world, said Victoria sadly, sitting on the bed. I hope you enjoyed your days of freedom, because they were the last you'll have for a long time. Emily let herself slide to the floor, her back against the cold door, realizing she had just discovered not only that Caleb was capable of keeping a woman captive, but that she would probably be the next. Outside, she heard Caleb's footsteps moving away down the corridor, and had the distinct impression that he was whistling a cheerful melody, as if he had just solved a particularly irritating problem. Emily remained silent for several minutes, trying to absorb the magnitude of her situation. She was locked in with a woman who could be her only ally or a genuinely disturbed person. There was no way to be absolutely certain. But one thing was clear. Caleb had revealed his true nature by keeping them prisoner. "How long have you known—" "He's your half-brother?" asked Victoria suddenly, making Emily raise her head abruptly. "How do you—" "Caleb told me. He finds amusement in the irony of the situation." Victoria stood up and walked to the barred window, looking at the lavender fields that stretched to the horizon. "He discovered the truth about his father's relationship with your mother about 5 years ago. That's when he began planning this marriage." Emily felt nausea rise in her throat. "He knew from the beginning that we were related." Not only knew, but found it exciting. For Caleb, breaking taboos is a form of exercising supreme power, proving that he can do anything without consequences. "And you? How did you get involved with him?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "The same way you did. I was chosen, pursued, seduced. He found me in Denver when I was vulnerable after the death of my parents. A charming billionaire who appeared as a savior. We married 3 months after meeting." "And when did you realize the truth?" "Gradually. First there were small things. Him deciding my clothes, controlling my contacts, monitoring my movements. He said it was protection, care. When I tried to resist, the episodes began." Victoria made air quotes with her fingers. "Episodes?" "He drugged me, put substances in my food, in my drink, things that caused hallucinations, paranoia, panic attacks. Then he called doctors he paid, who documented my breakdowns. Gradually, he built a complete medical history of mental instability. The horror of the situation deepened for Emily, and nobody suspected. Who would suspect? A rich and respected husband, concerned about a clearly unbalanced wife. The doctors saw the symptoms, not the causes, and Caleb is very convincing when he wants to be." "How did you manage to call my mother if you're imprisoned here?" Victoria smiled for the first time, and there was an astuteness in her eyes that Emily hadn't noticed before. "I have my methods. Mrs. Davis isn't as loyal as she appears. She already lost a daughter to a violent man and pities me. Sometimes she allows me to use the emergency phone in the kitchen when Caleb is absent. Then you can help me get out of here. I can try, but you need to understand that Caleb won't simply let you leave. He invested years planning this marriage. You represent something important to him, perhaps the final conquest." The sound of footsteps in the corridor interrupted them. Caleb was returning, and by the firm rhythm of his steps he seemed determined. The door opened, revealing him with a tray of food and a serene expression that drastically contrasted with the situation. "I hope you've had a productive conversation," he said, placing the tray on a small table. "I brought lunch. I imagined you must be hungry." "I won't eat anything you bring," said Emily immediately. Caleb smiled, as if he had expected this reaction. "Smart. Victoria probably warned you about my previous techniques." He turned to Victoria. "Always so dramatic, cara mia, making me seem like a monster." "You are a monster," retorted Victoria. "I'm a man who knows what he wants and does what's necessary to get it." Caleb approached Emily, who instinctively backed away. "And what I want, my dear wife, is you, completely, without resistance, without games, without the interference of third parties." "I will never accept that," said Emily, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Yes, you will, eventually." Caleb touched her face with a delicacy that made the gesture even more disturbing. "Because, unlike Victoria, you have something to lose. Your mother." Emily's blood froze. "What does that mean?" "Eleanor is very sick, did you know? Pancreatic. Cancer advanced stage. The doctors give her perhaps 6 months to live, but with adequate treatment, expensive, in specialized clinics, well, she could live for years." The revelation hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her mother was dying, and he had known it all along. "You're lying." "Unfortunately, no. The exams are in my office if you want to see them. The question is, do you want your mother to spend her last months receiving the best possible treatment, or do you prefer that she withers away in New York public hospitals while you throw tantrums here?" The emotional blackmail was devastating in its precision. Caleb had found exactly the leverage needed to control her. "What kind of deal are you proposing?" asked Emily, hating herself for asking the question. "Simple. You stop the resistance, accept your role as my wife, and I guarantee that Eleanor receives treatment in Houston at the best oncological clinic in the world. Refuse, and she won't. See even the American doctors. I'll be too busy resolving legal issues of our marriage to worry about charity." Emily looked at Victoria, who observed the scene with a desolate expression. She knew that the Italian woman had gone through the same process, being broken, blackmailed, manipulated, until there was no choice left. "And if I accept, what happens to Victoria?" "Ah, finally an interesting question." Caleb turned to Victoria with a cruel smile. "Dear Victoria will be transferred to a discreet clinic in Oregon, where she'll receive adequate care for the rest of her days. Not ideal, but better than less comfortable alternatives." The threat was clear. If Emily didn't cooperate, Victoria would suffer the consequences. "I need time to think," said Emily. "Naturally. You have until dawn tomorrow to decide." Caleb headed for the door. "Oh, and Emily, don't try anything heroic. The chateau employees are very well paid to ensure that my guests remain safe." After he left, silence weighed in the room like a shroud. Emily let herself fall on the bed beside Victoria, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. "He always does this," said Victoria softly. "Finds exactly what matters most to you and uses it as a weapon." "How did you endure it?" "I didn't. That's why I've been here for 3 years, pretending to be crazy in the hope that he'll eventually get tired and kill me, because it would be more merciful than living as a broken doll." Emily closed her eyes, trying to find some way out of the perfect trap that Caleb had built. Her dying mother, Victoria in danger, she herself trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. But then, in the darkness behind her closed eyelids, an idea began to form. Dangerous, desperate, but perhaps her only chance. "Victoria," she said slowly, "you said that Mrs. Davis sometimes helps you." "Yes, why? What if we didn't try to escape from him, but instead used his own tactics against him?" Victoria looked at her with renewed interest. "Continue." "He wants me to accept being his wife, to stop resisting. What if I did exactly that, but for completely different reasons than he imagines?" For the first time in days, Emily felt something like hope growing in her chest. If she was going to be forced to enter Caleb's game, at least she would play by her own rules. Emily spent the entire night planning with Victoria. The Italian woman, initially skeptical, was gradually convinced that the plan could work. It was risky, required perfect timing, and depended on Caleb underestimating the intelligence of both, something that his ego made probable. When the door opened the following morning, Caleb found Emily alone, sitting calmly in the chair near the window. Victoria had been transferred during the night, in fact hidden in the attic with the help of Mrs. Davis, who had finally been convinced to actively help in the silent rebellion. "Made your decision?" asked Caleb, studying Emily's serene face. "I have," she replied, standing up with calculated grace. "I accept your terms. I will be your wife in every sense." Something in Caleb's eyes shone, triumph, satisfaction, and perhaps relief. He had expected more resistance. "A wise choice," he said, approaching slowly. "Your mother will receive the best possible treatment. You have my word." "And Victoria?" "Already transferred to a discreet clinic. She'll receive adequate care." Emily nodded, pretending to believe the lie. In fact, Victoria was just a few meters away, hidden and waiting for the right moment for the next phase of the plan. In the weeks that followed, Emily played the role of the submissive wife with disturbing perfection. She accepted the clothes Caleb chose, participated in the elegant dinners, smiled when he talked about his business. At night, she allowed herself to be touched with a passivity that he interpreted as acceptance, but that was in fact active resistance. She was there physically, but her mind and soul remained her own. Caleb, convinced of his victory, began to relax his vigilance. He spent more time in Napa taking care of business, leaving Emily freer in the chateau. It was the mistake she had been waiting for. During one of his prolonged absences, Emily and Victoria, with the help of Mrs. Davis, began to collect evidence. They photographed documents from Caleb's office, recorded telephone conversations using an old recorder they found in the attic, documented the existence of the improvised prison where Victoria had been kept. But the most important thing was discovering that there were other victims. 3 previous women, all officially committed to psychiatric clinics, all with medical histories fabricated by Caleb. One of them, they discovered through discreet calls, had died by suicide 2 years before. Another had completely disappeared from medical records. The most devastating evidence came from an unexpected source, Anthony Montgomery himself. Caleb's father had left detailed diaries about his relationship with Eleanor, including the suspicion that Emily could be his daughter. More importantly, he had left a sealed letter to be opened only in case of his sudden death, where he detailed the concerning behaviors he had observed in Caleb since adolescence. "My son possesses an unhealthy need for control that I fear has its origin in traumas I couldn't resolve," said one passage. "I observed him manipulate colleagues, teachers, even pets in a calculating way. I fear that one day this behavior will manifest in a dangerous way in intimate relationships." It was the confirmation they needed. Caleb wasn't just a controlling man, but someone with behavior patterns established for decades. The final confrontation happened on a stormy night when Caleb returned unexpectedly from Napa. He found Emily in the library, apparently reading calmly, but his trained eyes immediately noticed that something was different. Documents had been moved, drawers opened. "Looking for something specific, dear?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Knowledge," replied Emily, closing the book she was pretending to read, "about my new family." "And what did you discover?" Emily stood up, facing him with a serenity that surprised him. 3 months of playing the role of the submissive wife had changed something fundamental in her. They hadn't broken her. They had taught her to hide her strength until the right moment. "I discovered that you killed your first wife, that you kept the second in captivity until she died, that you falsified medical records to commit sane women as crazy." Caleb didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled. That same cold smile she had learned to fear. "And what do you intend to do with these discoveries?" "I already did it," she said simply. It was then that all the lights of the chateau turned on at once, and the sound of vehicles arriving echoed in the courtyard. Through the windows, Caleb saw California police cars and vans of medical teams. "You wouldn't do this," he said, but for the first time his voice carried uncertainty. "Your mother." "My mother is being treated in Houston at this moment," said Emily. Apparently, when authorities investigate cases of international kidnapping, they discover interesting things about bank accounts and medical treatments paid with dirty money. Caleb backed up a step, realizing he had completely underestimated the woman in front of him. "Victoria is dead," he lied desperately. "I killed her yesterday." "Victoria is giving an interview to investigators at this moment," retorted Emily. "Along with the other 2 ex-wives you said were dead. Apparently they were just hidden, waiting for an opportunity to testify against you." The library door opened, revealing California investigators, accompanied by Victoria, who looked more alive than Emily had ever seen her. "Caleb Montgomery," said the principal inspector, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, forgery of medical documents, and suspicion of homicide." When they put the handcuffs on Caleb, he looked at Emily one last time. There was no more charm, control, or manipulation in his eyes, just genuine surprise. "How?" he asked simply. "You taught me," replied Emily. "You taught me that sometimes, to survive, we must become what we most fear. You taught me to lie, manipulate, plan. The difference is that I did all this for freedom, not for control." 6 months later, Emily was back in New York taking care of her mother, who was responding surprisingly well to the treatment in Houston. The chateau had been confiscated by the California authorities, and Caleb was awaiting trial in a maximum security prison. Eleanor, weak but lucid, finally told her daughter the whole truth about Anthony Montgomery, about their relationship, and about the reasons that led her to hide so many secrets. "Do you forgive me?" she asked one afternoon, holding Emily's hand. "I forgave you a long time ago, Mother," replied Emily. "I discovered that carrying anger is a luxury I can't afford. I prefer to use my energy to build new things." She had started writing, not romantic short stories like before, but a book about her experience. Victoria, now free and rebuilding, her life in Colorado, had become a close friend and collaborator on the project. "Want to know something strange?" said Emily to Victoria during one of their video calls. "I almost feel sorry for him." "Sorry?" Caleb spent his entire life trying to control others because he couldn't control himself. So in the end, it was he who was trapped, not just physically, but in behavior patterns that destroyed him. Victoria smiled, recognizing the wisdom that had emerged from the traumatic experience. "And you? How are you feeling about all this?" Emily looked out the window of her apartment in New York, observing the pulsating life of the city she had learned to love again. "Free," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, completely free. And I discovered that freedom isn't just the absence of prisons. It's the ability to choose who we want to be, regardless of who others want us to be." The emotional scar would remain forever, but as she had learned in the chateau's garden, some wounds create roots that bloom into something stronger and more beautiful than existed before. And for the first time,